Gary Lineker has a habit of boiling right-wingers' piss, and he's done it again. The Match of the Day host tweeted this in response to Suella Braverman's new migration bill. There is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order. So that's a reply to someone in a tweet thread. But it's that comparison between the language used in the 1930s that caused a really, really big row. A stream of Tory MPs, as you can imagine, tweeted their outrage, and it made the front page of two Tory papers. So the Daily Mail went with Lineker faces BBC rebuke for likening small boats plan to Nazis. Importantly, he likened the language to that of the Nazis, not actually the policy. We also have one from the Daily Telegraph. BBC urged to sack Lineker after Nazi migrant jibe. Now, given he's a very popular host of one of the BBC's most popular shows, I think that would be somewhat unlikely. Suella Braverman herself was asked for her response on the morning media round. This is what she told BBC Breakfast.
I'm disappointed. Obviously, I think it's unhelpful to compare our measures, which are lawful, proportionate, and indeed compassionate, to 1930s Germany. I also think that we're on the side of the British people here. It's plain for anyone to see that the British people have had enough of this situation of thousands of people coming here illegally at huge cost to the taxpayer and undermining our laws and, in fact, the British generosity. That needs to stop. We need to take necessary steps now to ensure that if you're coming here illegally, you'll be detained and you'll be removed. And that's what this bill will do.
British generosity, of course, amounts to allowing a relatively very small number of refugees and asylum to settle here compared to other comparable countries, and then deciding that it's too overwhelming and we're going to have to rip up a refugee convention from 70 years ago. Right? That's how compassionate we are, or how compassionate Suella Braverman wants us to be. Gary Lineker has apparently been spoken to by BBC bosses, but has refused to delete the original tweet and seems pretty defiant, saying this: "I have never known such love and support in my life than I'm getting this morning. England World Cup goals aside, possibly. I want to thank each and every one of you. It means a lot. I'll continue to try and speak up for those poor souls that have no voice. Cheers, all." Dahlia, what's your take on the Gary Lineker, Suella Braverman, BBC bosses row?
It really does show sort of how far right we've been dragged, that Gary Lineker is being considered somehow beyond the pale. You know, Gary Lineker is a pretty, as far as I can see, inoffensive character. It's really unclear to me what the problem is here. I don't understand how this violates BBC impartiality rules. He's not declaring support for a particular party. He's having an opinion on a policy, which last time I checked, as you know, a citizen of an allegedly free country, he should be able to have that right. Is it the problem that it's seen to be distasteful, that he is drawing comparisons between the way in which refugees are being treated here and, you know, the kind of language that was used to describe internal others and used to describe people who are otherized in Nazi Germany? It's actually fairly uncontroversial. A lot of historians of genocide and historians of fascism have long been warning that the dehumanizing way refugees and migrants are being treated, both in political discourse and in media discourse, is akin to the language that paved the way for some of the atrocities that we saw in Nazi Germany. In particular, what we're talking about here is the suspension of legal norms for particular groups of people after a long process of dehumanizing those people, of demonizing and isolating this idea of a particular group of people that are threatening the nation and creating, you know, overinflated ideas of threat, and then using that as a precursor to suspend legal norms for that group of people. That is exactly what is happening here. This bill is about suspending norms that have been in place for 70 years, which is that everyone has the right to have their asylum case heard in a country of their choice. That is what is now being suspended for particular groups of people, so people who are traveling by boat, and which basically means anyone who's not, as we've previously mentioned, Ukrainian. So it's actually entirely uncontroversial, what Gary Lineker is saying. I can't see why there's any legitimate reason why the BBC would be giving him a stern talking to. This is not the first time that a BBC staff member has expressed an opinion online. So I really do think that this is about kind of disciplining what public figures can say when it comes to criticizing particular policies that are deployed by this government. I'm going to finish by saying this. People like to clutch their pearls about these comparisons to Nazi Germany and these comparisons and kind of really bringing home the serious consequences that this bill has for our civil liberties and human rights more broadly. And, one thing that Tony Benn said that I think is really profound here is this idea that you should always keep an eye on how governments are treating refugees, because it's how they would treat you if they thought they could get away with it. And this is where I think it's really important that we contextualize how this isn't just about what's happening to refugees now, even though that is it's incredibly egregious, it's incredibly worrying. We need to fight it with everything we've got. But also that that this is about a broader decline in respect for legal norms, in civil liberties and human rights. And we see it in, the government passing deeply authoritarian laws. The Council of European Trade Unions came out and said that if the minimum service levels bill is passed, which the government has been trying to pass, that means that Britain would have some of the most authoritarian anti-union policies, certainly in Europe and even comparably within the world. We have this broader decline of legal norms and human rights that is incredibly worrying. And it is impacting refugees the hardest and the fastest, but it is ultimately a norm that is coming for all of us. So Gary Lineker is completely right to be ringing the alarm on this topic.
There's a tweet that's been going around today is from Gary Lineker in 2017, from the April the 19th, 2017, when he tweeted "Bin Corbyn." And this was a couple of months before Labour had their surprisingly good election, which they nearly won. So people are sharing this to sort of say, well, Gary Lineker, classic example of one of these wealthy liberals who doesn't like right-wing rhetoric when it comes from the Conservatives, but when there was a party leader who was unashamedly pro-refugee and was willing to say so, they actively sort of said nasty things about them. The other point to make about this is I don't remember the front page of any newspapers saying that Gary Lineker should be sacked because he said that the leader of the opposition should be binned. Right? That to me seems much more political or much more party political than saying that a refugee policy seems to be pretty heartless. As ever, any questions about impartiality, when it was all directed at Corbyn, no one in the establishment cared about. If it's ever directed at the Tories, suddenly, oh my God, this person has to lose their job. The whole notion of impartiality is defunct. These liberal intelligentsia blobs, they are going to sort of start some civil war between Remainers and Brexiteers, blah, 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 blah. We all know the real issue with impartiality is when it comes to someone who is actually fundamentally outside of the establishment, fundamentally is opposed to vested interests in this country. Suella Braverman isn't that, by the way. She's nasty, but she's not that, which means that you do get some wealthy liberals who are willing to say she's rubbish, and you also get some wealthy people who are willing to let her go by her business.